engagement listening session. We apologize for the brief delay in getting started, but we'll be sure to get to as many questions as we can today. This is an opportunity for city staff to hear from you. I'm Tiffany Blackwell, and in the room we have Brian Bergman, Director of Strategy and Budget, Kelly Flannery, CFO, Brent Kegel from the City Manager's Office, and Pamela Weidman, the Director of Housing and Neighborhood Services. So today what we'll discuss, we'll go over a few housekeeping items, and then we'll give Ryan Bergman will give a brief overview of the budget, and then that's when we'll turn it over to hear from you. And then after that, we'll share some budget resources so you can stay connected with us through this whole budget process. During this listening session, our goal is to collect feedback from our community, and we will answer as many questions as we can live. Anything that we need to go back and research will be posted online. Following a brief presentation from our budget director, we'll move into an interactive poll to gain insight into what's important to you, and then we'll close out with an open discussion. For polling, you will see a window pop up on the side of your screen. Select which option you'd like to vote for and click submit. When it's time for the open discussion, you can sign up by using the raise your hand feature to be called upon, or sign up using the Q&A window. The raise your hand icon is on the right panel on your screen. It looks like a high five. Staff will keep a list of who is next to speak, and when it's your turn, we will call your name and you will be unmuted. At any time, feel free to ask questions in the Q&A window. If you do not see it now, click the three dots next to the chat button at the bottom right of your screen and select Q&A. With that, I'll turn it over to our budget director, Ryan Bergman, to kick off our session with a brief overview of the City of Charlotte's budget.
Hey, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on what I know is a really nice day outside. We want this to be mostly about you guys and being able to ask questions, get your voice in the room on what you would like to see funded, things of that nature. But I am going to spend the first 5 or so minutes just going over a few slides and explaining how the city's budget works. So the first thing about the city's budget is that we are split from the county, so you pay one property tax bill, but a portion of it goes to the city and a portion of it goes to the county. So as you see on the screen there, you'll see that a little under 2/3 of your property tax bill goes to the county to support things like education, social services, homelessness, public health, the jail, and then a little over 1/3 of your property tax bill goes to the city, and what you're primarily supporting there, police, fire, transportation, housing, solid waste pickup. So how that works in real numbers is if you have a $200,000 house, for instance, you're going to spend about $700 to the city and about $1,300 to the county. So now it's focusing specifically on the city budget. Your 34.81 cent tax rate is split into two things. Around 80% of it goes to the general fund for city operations, and then a little over 20% goes to our capital program. So our capital program is where we would fund things like local roads, it's where we would fund things like new sidewalks, and it's where we would fund affordable housing infrastructure. What you'll see on the pie chart there is the type of services that we offer when you're inclusive of the capital investments that we make. You'll see that police is the biggest at about 31%, but you'll also see that fire, housing, transportation are also big pieces of the city budget. A little bit about how the city budget is organized. Let me start on the right there, where you see enterprise funds. So you recognize the names there, aviation, cats, water, stormwater. You either pay those through a monthly bill, like water and stormwater, or you would pay them through a dedicated sales tax, like in the case of cats, or for service with cats, or in the case of aviation, you actually wouldn't pay for anything at all unless you use the airport. So those are all operated by the city, but there is no support of your tax dollars that go there. And then under that, you have special revenue funds. So you would hear things such as hospitality funds. So if somebody stays in a hotel room, they pay a tax. Those are used for a specific thing as required by the state. And so those also don't mingle with your property tax dollars. On the left, you'll see our governmental funds, and you'll see the general fund, which is where you'll pay for most of the operations from any given year. I have a chart there. I won't read the names, but you can see the bigger departments that we have and how big their current FY21 budget is. And then the things under it, debt service and pay-as-you-go, that's how we support the aforementioned capital program. So this chart kind of shows property tax and sales tax and where it goes, where the money actually goes to support city services. You'll see the majority of the money does go into the general fund to pay for police protection, fire protection, solid waste, and then a piece goes into the bottom there to support our capital program. And what that capital program is used for primarily is every 2 years we will go to the voters in November with a plan for a bond referendum. And if the voters approve it, which we're fortunate that they have for several years, we then take out debt. So in this case, FY21, so last November, we took out $197 million in debt to support initiatives. Included in that was $50 million in affordable housing and about $100 million in transportation improvements. So since I'm just doing a 5-minute update, I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of some of the current initiatives that are going on and how they support some of the city council priorities that are laid out on your screen. So jobs plan, Safe Charlotte, corridors, these are all things that could be a hour-long meeting in themselves just in trying to explain the information. But I really think it's important to show this in that we try to have programs that link to city council priorities to make sure that we are driving our city council priorities forward. So the budget process roadmap, I want to be very clear that the people in this room and city staff in general, we're not the deciders of the budget. What we try to be is subject matter experts in some cases, but also we're the people that do the analysis to get the information to city council for city council to make decisions. And that's really the case with the budget, where we have a dedicated budget staff who works throughout the year. We have 3 budget workshops with city council in the spring. We actually had one yesterday. And then in May, the manager proposes a budget that city council then has several meetings to make adjustments to before they approve it. So finally, we really want you to stay connected with us. We want you to be engaged. We do have a budget survey that we have your emails we can send out if you have not taken it yet. But we're trying to build a packet of feedback on community engagement. So when we get to this next section here, if you have a statement or a question, we will include it in some kind of a feedback packet, which will include our survey results that we'll share with city council, who I already mentioned are the decision makers. So finally, as we get to this next part, we'll turn it over to you for any questions, any comments, any feedback. We'll try to provide context wherever appropriate if we have city staff available. We're fortunate to have Brent Cagle, who's the aviation director and is on assignment in the city manager's office. We're fortunate to have Pam Weidman, who's our director of housing services. We also have Debbie Smith on the line, who is our assistant transportation director. And then we have several strategy and budget staff. So we're really interested in this, and I think we're good to get started.
Okay, so now is the fun time where you can raise your hand and or put questions in the Q&A feature in the chat. I see we have potentially a couple coming through. So while we're getting those in, I think what we'll do is get our first poll going. If we can go with the first question, you'll have about 30 seconds to answer the poll question as soon as it pops up on your screen. Give us just a second to pull that up. So, of the options listed, which city department would you increase funding? The options are police, housing and neighborhood services, transportation, economic development, solid waste services, and innovation and technology. So go ahead and make your selection. Okay, great. And then we can see the results in just a moment. Okay, so a lot of votes for Housing and Neighborhood Services. Luckily, the director of that department is here, and she's giving us a big head nod, so thank you for that. It looks like we have our first person who's asked to speak, Sebastian Fakalik? Did I pronounce that correctly?
Sebastian Veselak. No, thank you for hosting this conversation. I guess, do I have a time limit? I'm assuming you probably don't want me to go too long.
I apologize. We're trying to keep all the comments to around 2 minutes. I apologize for not saying that in the beginning.
Sure, no problem. Well, I'm just here. I don't know if my camera's even available, but just kind of share. I know in the past, police funding has been kind of the thing that has been highlighted to lower. I think, I mean, just looking at the budget right now, making up 31% is way too high. I recall that it's been pretty much going up almost every single year. And oftentimes, I know in previous conversations, the transparency around the police budget has been lackluster, very little answers. And then I feel like there were additional funds that were coming out of the capital fund to fund things like the helicopter, so it wasn't even included in the original budget. So I'm kind of curious how those funds are kind of being appropriated, and so you end up with even higher budgets for the police than in the past. I looked at, for instance, back in like 2011, I think, what the police funding looked like then, what kind of results are coming out of the CMPD. I know every year they come back and they probably make requests, but if we're not getting results that build trust with the community, as we've seen, from the numerous situations that happened, police killings, etc., I think it's worthwhile to understand what is actually going into the CMPD budget. I know just looking at a pie chart, I don't even know what really happens to that money. Last year during the protests, people were asking, how much of that funding is utilized for some sort of weapons, how much stockpiles of weapons are there. And that was a lot of stuff that, we don't really see. There's no real transparency around that. So that's one of the key things. I work in workforce development, and I've worked with the economic development department. I work with them closely. I think that's a department that would definitely also need a lot more investments. But again, this is kind of, I think we're just looking at this conversation very broadly. What that would entail could definitely have more conversations. But again, I think the police funding is way too high, and I think it'd be worthwhile to look at its significant cuts. $290 million a year, basically. Well, not a year, but it's kind of it's kind of ridiculous, honestly. So,
well, thank you. We appreciate your comments. Thank you so much.
Sure. So let me talk a little bit about some of the work that the Budget Committee did last year in exploring the police budget and where we ended up with where we did for FY21. So in the police budget, which is, of course, our biggest service, you have about a $290 million budget, but a big chunk of that, about $30 million, is for things like 911, animal care, and security at the airport. So out of the remaining budget, which is about $250 million, 86% of that is actually officers, personnel, benefits, and insurance. So that's really where the money goes for the police budget. So we did some work this last summer really exploring that. Is that the appropriate amount of officers? And when you get into that way, what we got to is that there's 13 divisions in police in the city. There's 13 different divisions. And just dividing Charlotte's population, that's about 70,000 people per division. So in those 70,000 person divisions, you'd have about 20 to 25 patrol officers working at any given time with the budget that we have now. And so when you try to figure out the 911 calls that police is responding to, we made the determination that we do have an appropriate amount of staffing, if we're not actually a little bit behind from those metrics, because we actually have about 370,000 911 calls per year. So when we look at it that way, there is, it's a very personnel intensive department, but we did feel that in the budget committee and the city council did feel that that was the appropriate level. When you mentioned the capital investments, that's just that's how our budgets are organized. That's not Charlotte. That's national, essentially. When we pay for something out of debt, we have to include it in the capital program, which is separate from the police operating budget. But I will tell you that the slide that I showed at the beginning of this, it did have all police expenditures with the capital program and the operating fund included in that. Thank you.
Okay, great. And I see there may be some comments in the chat, but we're asking if you have questions that you put them in the Q&A panel so that we can make sure that we keep track of them. The next person we have to speak is Raymond Frazier.
Hi, hello. Can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, thank you so much for giving me this time. I wanted to talk about the previous slides that I cannot remember his name. He presented at the beginning of the talk. I was trying to recall the slides that he was talking about, but he was kind of moving too fast for me to catch everything at once, to read everything, you know, just to digest everything that was being presented to me. I agree with Sebastian as he was talking. I believe that I understood what you were saying about the budget, you know, about the cost and $30 million being expended for the police force, and the other extra, you said 250 million, but it's actually 260 million. That's still, I believe that's still a lot of money to give the police. Just in general, just thinking about it, our economic in Charlotte is just Charlotte in general is a fast growing city, just in the United States in general, one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. When you're thinking about an economy that, you know, have over 1 million people, I believe that a city that's holding that many people should at least invest in the communities around it. Like, say, the roads that he's talked about earlier, the homeless people he mentioned earlier. The budget that I'm looking at, I'm looking at the economic development, which is actually the funding for it is actually quite intriguing to look at, because it's little to none. It's barely getting any funding. Like, I lived in Charlotte majority of my life. Roads are still bad. We have potholes in suburban neighborhoods that haven't been filled up in years. We have street lights that are barely being shown around, like, especially highways, to where, like, it gets super dark. You barely can see the road at night sometimes. To where, like, I believe that economic development is definitely something that we should definitely focus on, other than providing so much funding in the police force, to where, yeah, we have over 300,000, you know, police calls, but majority of those police calls are not just like threats. They're majority probably like mental health issues, things like domestic violence, this, that, and the third, to where they require police assistance. But most of the times those calls are not, you know, life-threatening issues, to where, like, I feel like as the, you know, the sources of, you know, especially with this panel right here, I believe acknowledging the people and what their, you know, opinions are. I feel like a lot of people have a lot of ideas, to where I feel like the city can actually help the people other than just helping the city, to where, like, the people make the city. The people, the economy, everything we y'all tax us for so much. We have over 1 million people. So I'm pretty sure the money that y'all get from taxing so many people that are living here, minus the homeless people who are literally living on the streets that we pass by almost every single day, you're not even taxing them. But the people who are literally the working economy, we're getting taxed so much to where the police are getting more fund than the actual economy or just anything else, or innovation, solid waste, internal services, this and the third. Like, I just want to hear your opinions on that.
Thank you so much for your comments. We really appreciate it.
Problem.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fraser. Brian, first off, I apologize for trying to go too fast. I just feel like I'm taking your time from engagements, and so I probably went a little fast there. And we can certainly send you the presentation so you can look if we haven't. I wanted to, first of all, acknowledging your feedback on the police budget. acknowledging your feedback on how you think economic development should have more support and more funding. I also wanted to touch on two other things that you said. You mentioned street lighting. That's been an initiative that we've been working on to try to get more street lights into some of the neighborhoods. That's been an outreach effort from CDOT. And then also, you talk about mental health calls with police, and that is a really good point. And our city council did look at that this last year. And as part of the Safe Charlotte initiative, they made a couple of recommendations that we're in the process of working on. So the first is there was previously a crisis team where we paired a mental health worker or a counselor with a police officer to respond to incidents so that they don't escalate. So we doubled funding for that. I say we, I mean the city council approved double funding for that to help with those initiatives. But on top of that, they also recommended that we start a new initiative where we have one mental health professional and an EMT that responds to several low threat mental health type calls rather than sending a police officer. So it's modeled after some of these similar programs in Eugene, Oregon and Denver. And so that's not fully off the ground yet. It was recently approved a few months ago, but that is certainly an initiative where we're trying to convert some calls that previously went to police to non-police sources.
Okay, we have a question. Where do homeless citizens fit into the budget and in order to restore humanity back to those most in need?
So let me turn that over to Pam Weidman in a second to talk a little bit about housing under the backdrop that we do receive some grants, but we also work in partnership with the county, who I mentioned does have social services and homelessness.
Thank you, Ryan, for that. And to answer that question a little bit more for you, to drill down a little bit more, every year the city receives about $10 million of federal funding. Within that federal funding, we receive emergency solutions grant funding. And that funding is particularly and specifically used for homeless services. And so through using that funding, we partner with agencies like A Roof Above, the Salvation Army Women's Shelter, to make sure that we are funneling that funding to them so that they can do things like shelter operations and homeless prevention. So that's one way we use our federal resources to do that. Another way we use our resources to do that is with our housing trust fund dollars. We've previously funded permanent housing for chronically homeless. Examples of that include the name is escaping me. It's in the Druid Hills community. More Place. We funded More Place. That is permanent supportive housing for the chronically homeless. McCreesh Place was the former name of it. We funded that. Supportive housing communities is what it's called now. So we use our housing trust fund dollars we have in the past used our housing trust fund dollars to help with the homeless also. One of the things, another way we've helped during the pandemic is, again, we've helped agencies like A Roof Above to make sure that people can be sheltered in a socially distanced way. So we use our local dollars, but we mainly use our federal dollars to help with housing the homelessness, and I hope that helps.
Before we go to the next question, I realized that I rudely thanked everybody except our CFO, Kelly Flannery, who I work so closely with that it just escaped me. So I apologize for that.
Can't count out the CFO. Okay, the next person to speak is Miss Maddie Marshall.
Hi, everyone. Okay, number one, I would like us to really look at housing and home ownership. In 2010, under the administration of Anthony Fox, we, the city of Charlotte, had a plan to end homelessness by 2010. Also, in 2007, we had a policy around Housing Charlotte, 2007. So we must be accountable when it comes to housing, home ownership, and preservation of our historic neighborhoods. Number two, the CityLink goal line, that's a commitment that we have to the citizens along the Davis Ford Road corridor. That half-cent sales tax, we rushed to the polls, and now we have to extend the CityLink goal line up to the third component. The economic development component in our historic Washington Heights plan, we put in there economic development, sidewalks, and so forth, and along with other things. But when it comes to economic development, we have to have new development dollars. And that's clearly outlined in the plan that was approved by the City Council in 2002. And you know what year it is now. And third, I think that's number 4. But I must caution the City Council, the mayor, about this ad hoc committee on arts and culture. We must know by now the inequities around the arts in the city of Charlotte. We all want arts throughout the city of Charlotte. At one point, the arts was centered around cultural institutions that did not reach the entire city of Charlotte nor Mecklenburg. So now we are in a position, I just want to caution everyone, it's not the time to change horses in the middle of a screen. And finally, when spider webs unite, we can all get together and tie that lion up. So we're going to be cautious about our dollars, but those things that matter. And I was on the county commissioner's budget program too. And you know, everyone's talking about the arts, science, history, and culture. That's the number one priority. And we are in the midst of a pandemic. Thank you all so very much. I do not need a response. Just make them a priority. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Okay, we have another question I think we can expand upon. Can the police budget include mental health staff so that the police can police? Many 911 calls do not require police.
Sure. So this goes back a little bit to what I was saying, where we approved as a city the Safe Charlotte plan. And I think if you're watching on Facebook, we can put the link to calls. So we, the RAND Corporation, on how to develop. So whether or not that means that there's mental health professionals in the police budget, or if these mental health professionals are outside of the police budget, I think that would be dependent on the recommendations from the third party, which would then go to City Council to be approved. So that is certainly an area that we are looking at, and the analysis and the potential changes are already in process.
Great. The next speaker we have is Martiza Ortiz. Martiza Ortiz.
Okay, sorry. I don't know how to unmute myself. I don't know how to use this. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I agree with what everybody's been saying lately. So my question goes around the police. You know, I do believe that that's too high, that we need to be focusing. You know, my thing about Charlotte is like, I want Charlotte to be a beacon city. So so that other cities can follow us. So are we thinking of ever, defunding the police? I know one of the cities, I can't think of the name, but they defunded it, they just revamped, right? Because when I went to my first protest, they were in all that police garb. I felt like I did a crime and I was just peacefully protesting. Do we need all of that, for protests? And then regarding, I heard about the social workers and counselors, a lot of this can be de-escalated with social workers and counselors, right? And then let them police, for what they have to police, and then the rest of the stuff, they don't need to be worried about that. So, and then with what was it? I can't think of it, but anyways, that's all I have for right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ortiz. We'll certainly share in acknowledging your feedback on the police budget and reducing it to the budget decision makers in our document. We did look at it some last year, as I talked a little bit about earlier, but we'll be sure to share that. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bryce Cracknell.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. In August of last year, Mayor Lyles apologized for decades of inequalities in the city of Charlotte. I'm afraid to say that the city has never known equality. With the criminal justice system built to uphold the legacy of chattel slavery and white supremacy, coupled with a police system that does the same, I don't know how the city will ever know equality or equity or liberation if Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department continues to exist as is. Last summer, thousands of Charlotte residents reached out to city council offices to defund the police and reallocate that money to community development, services, and it didn't happen. I was raised here in Charlotte, and I was told that my actions speak louder than words. So no matter how many apologies are issued, the city's budget is what speaks up most loudly. 40% of the fiscal year 2021 general fund expenditures went to policing. In other words, that 40% went to criminalizing the poor and upholding white supremacy, whereas 4% went to transportation, less than 3% went to housing and neighborhood services, and less than 1% went to economic development. The city's budget is a reflection of the city's values. And if the city of Charlotte values policing 40 times more than it does economic development, what does that say? If the mayor is serious about that apology, then it is well past time to reallocate those funds and defund the police. Other cities are doing this important work. Why can't Charlotte?
Thank you for your feedback.
Great. So our next speaker is Daryl Greenberg. Daryl Greenberg. Okay, we'll come back to you. Got a question? Oh, I'm sorry, another speaker. Rose Jones Edwards. Rose Jones Edwards. Okay. I believe she's trying to connect now.
Hello.
Hi, yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I have a question, and it sort of evolves around the homelessness. And my question is, does Charlotte City or County not possess old buildings, land that could be used to house some of these people, providing either community showers or something just to get them off the streets? I think the city is paying money to put them up in hotels, but there's a lot of buildings here in Charlotte. Can we not repurpose some of the tools that we already have, as opposed to constantly reinventing the wheel, if you will? I think Charlotte is trying to do a good job, but coming from another, a bigger city, I immediately recognized that there was more that we could do. I myself is heavily involved in the reentry efforts, in economic development, economic upward mobility. I mean, we can just re-engineer some of the monies that we're currently spending and not necessarily increase a budget to address some of these things. Is there any creative design in place? I know you guys are doing your job. You're, you've been assigned to do specific tasks, but is there a creative element in your group that is there to explore other options than the status quo?
So, Ms. Jones-Edwards, thank you so much for that question. And you nailed it. Creativity and ingenuity is always important in this. And what I will tell you is, we are looking at alternatives right now about more permanent housing for the chronically homeless. Don't have any specific efforts for you right now on that, but we are very much aware that we have to expand our toolbox there. We continue to partner with the county, as I said before. And one of the things that I failed to say is within new developments, or even when people are coming to us to request funding to rehab naturally occurring affordable housing, we do have a requirement in funding those that at least 20% of the units are set aside for households or individuals earning 30% and below the area median income, which is where we see many of our homeless families. So we have not gotten it perfect yet, but we are aware that we need to expand our toolbox, and we are working with our homeless service providers to make sure that people are adequately housed where we can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So just a bit of a housekeeping. If you've already raised your hand to speak and you do not want to speak anymore, if you could lower your hand, that way we can make sure that we've accounted for everyone who's trying to speak today. And I believe Daryl Greenberg, are you able to speak? Can we hear you now? Yes.
I'm going to try. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'd like to address initially the police budget. I hear some of the constituents and the public speaking against police funding. I'm particularly opposed to their view, and I maintain that the examples in Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, and other cities that have decided that defunding is the way to go, New York City being another example, has produced nothing but additional crime and more hardship on people, particularly of the lower income strata. It is not the way to go. I applaud the percentages currently being used to fund the police, and if anything, it should be additional funding. And I say that because many of our police officers have to take two jobs in order to provide for their families. If there was more money provided for each individual police officer, particularly the young new starts, they would not have to work two jobs, and their attention span on a crisis situation would be more attuned to what their correct training would be. The addition of additional people in the mental health field is a nice feel-good thing, but it's not going to stop criminals from doing what they do. I've traveled many places in the world. They all have police departments, and they keep the criminals at bay, and we have to do the same thing here. And asking us to model ourselves after Portland and Seattle and all those other cities that are on the news on a regular basis, absolutely foolish. People should model their police departments and their pay programs after what Charlotte is doing. And as far as on a second topic, the homeless situation, yes, it's a problem here. It's only going to get worse. And the addition of new construction in areas that might be used for the homeless, buildings specifically suited for them that are designed to house many, many people in bunk bed situations with health areas such as kitchens and bathrooms would be appropriate. Because if not, it's only going to get worse here, and that is the solution for them. And private sector people could be approached to figure out how to design these buildings and what land to put them on. The school board has hundreds, if not thousands, of acres set aside, and those acres could be used for without any additional cost to house the homeless. Thank you for your time.
So acknowledging your feedback on supporting the police budget, I also want to touch on one thing you mentioned about police officer pay. So for the last 3 years, the city has not added any police officers. And so the increases in the budget each year have actually been an initiative to retain the police officers that we do have. So we did a study about 3 years ago that showed that when you compare us to our peer cities, our police officers were actually near the bottom as far as median and top pay. So we've had a multi-year plan to address it, to boost police officer pay over the last couple of years, which in our mind, on any side of the spectrum, if you have police officers that are more experienced, we feel that it can lead to better results. So the issue a couple of years ago is that we were losing a lot of officers to resignation, leaving for other forces, and then we were training in a lot of new officers. So we're hopeful that this initiative over the last couple of years will help some of those issues.
Great, thank you. We have a question from the audience. What initiatives are being put in place to help stimulate and support small business development?
So with the Federal CARES Act over this last year, that's where a lot of our economic development has been focused, because we put a lot of money, over $50 million, into the community to help small businesses through the Federal CARES Act. Beyond that, we also have some other unique initiatives, such as our Corridors of Opportunity program, which I believe we can get some more information out to the people on this call, where we are putting economic development dollars targeted to small businesses and small business development in 6 unique areas of the city. So the current money has been primarily in Beatty's Ford on West Boulevard, but we also have two more that we would look at in the next 2 budget cycles, and then 2 more beyond that. So there was $24.5 million of total Corridors of Opportunity funding this past budget year, and it seems like a program that is likely to continue. Beyond that, we have typical programs from year to year that we support out of our Economic Development Department, where we will work with small businesses on things like facade improvements and things of that nature.
Our next speaker is Vernon Jones.
Yes, how you guys doing today? I actually would agree with mostly everybody on here as far as when it concerns the budget for the police department. I do think it is a little bit extensive due to the fact they probably are the only ones that could kill people and still get a pension. But my question is basically, where does the budget fit for youth advancement opportunities for low-income communities in order to drop the crime rate, to give them some type of hope on a city that's actually failing in those communities?
So that's a really good question. One of the things that was in the Save Charlotte initiative was City Council devoted $1 million to initiatives for nonprofits, small nonprofits, to develop violence reduction strategies, particularly around youth. So it has to be a 501c3 nonprofit, and it has to have less than $150,000 in revenue. But the application period is actually open right now. It's open through March 31st for these nonprofits. And services for youth, such as mentorship, leadership development, conflict mediation, is a big part of that program. So that's just one recent example of funds that are going towards exactly what you're mentioning.
And this is kind of a follow-up question to that. How do other organizations get access to funding outside of the traditional organizations that receive annual funding?
So typically the city would be, I'm assuming that we're talking about nonprofits. So the city would only fund nonprofits unless it's services being provided. So as far as nonprofits, there's two sources. So I'll talk a little bit about the general fund piece, and if you want to talk a little bit about CDBG or anything there. So for the general fund piece, the Budget Office has an annual financial partners application process where nonprofits can submit an application for funding. You have to include a lot of information, of course, in your plan, and then annually in the budget, the City Council will appropriate money for those types of organizations. And then beyond that, we also have some other programs in housing and neighborhood services.
So another way that people can apply is that we have our out-of-school time partners funding, and the way that happens is we release an RFP, a request for proposal, and organizations are allowed to apply for that type of funding. Again, if it's around homelessness or some type of housing, individuals can apply for. We have rehabilitation programs that people can apply for to help them stay in their homes and address deferred maintenance. So out-of-school time partners, you can contact Housing and Neighborhood Services to learn more about other programs that nonprofits and households earning 80% and below the area median income that can apply for housing-related expenses.
And then one final piece, we also have what's called the Jumpstart Microgrant Program, which is very small grants, up to $5,000, I believe, which are designed for nonprofits that are really starting out, and they're looking for a way to jump into nonprofit status and build their services.
And Ryan, if I might, one more that I failed to mention, neighborhood matching grants. That's a program that's been around for many years. And through that program, what we want to do is we want to help neighborhoods do projects in their neighborhoods. A lot of what we get is kind of beautification projects. We get sign toppers if you wanted neighborhood identification projects. So we invite you to apply for those funds as well.
One thing I'll also add on workforce development and economic opportunities or mobility in the community. And it's something that's hard to see in a budget presentation because it's inherent in staffing costs. But one thing over the last really 3 to 5 years that the city has done throughout with its human resources department and then other departments like aviation, water, solid waste, the police department and other departments, we've really tried to grow opportunities when it comes to workforce development and try to target apprenticeship programs, training programs for the community so that they can better compete and create opportunities, career opportunities with the city. The city has about 8,000 employees, and we're always hiring in a variety of roles, and we really wanted to focus on our own internal resources to create workforce development and create opportunities in the community for the jobs that we hire for.
Awesome. Can you explain what City Council has asked the city manager to consider as it relates to arts and cultural investment?
So there was a committee recommendation that currently we spend $3.2 million on arts and culture from the general fund, which goes to the Arts and Science Council. So what the committee had looked at and asked the manager to do was to increase that to $4 million and then explore all kinds of options for how the money could be structured. So that's really the extent of what was discussed at City Council. This was either yesterday, actually, so not much has gone beyond that at this point.
We have another question for the audience. What focus can we make on recruiting businesses to Beatties Ford Road corridor so that we can create a live, work, play element and workforce development along that corridor?
So I think that fits in with the Corridors of Opportunity program that I had mentioned, where Beatties Ford is one of the first areas to receive investment beyond traditional investment in our capital program. there's $24.5 million. A pretty significant chunk of that has or will go to that area along with the West. So we're hopeful that additional investment there can spur economic activity.
And then I'm going to combine a couple questions because we're kind of right here at the end about how is education a part of the police budget and what education initiatives are incorporated into the CMPD budget?
So for police and fire, officers, firefighters receive a 5% salary increase that stays with them if they have an associate's degree, and they receive a 10% increase with them if they have a 4-year degree. So with police officers, the majority do actually have degrees. And if you're speaking beyond degrees to training, that's obviously a gigantic emphasis for them, where they are constantly trying to train their officers.
Okay, so that combines a couple questions. And this is a little bit about education about is there training for officers incorporated into the police budget?
Yes, and I don't have that exact number, but, oh, actually, if you give me a second, I actually might. Yeah, it looks like there's a little under $2 million dedicated to lines that could be considered training. But that doesn't mean, basically, the training budget would just be the cost of the training, the supplies, things like that, because if we're paying an officer to go to the training, that's, of course, paid through their normal salary. So there's a pretty good investment there. A couple of years ago, we also put in an additional $2 million to accelerate training, specifically around crisis intervention training for police officers.
Okay, I just want to be mindful of the time. We're getting close to the time. I don't think we have anyone else that has raised their hand. I'm confirming with the team to speak. So what we will do is we'll close out today's session with a quick poll, and then we'll just do a quick closeout as soon as that poll ends. I think they're pulling up the poll question now about our strategic priorities. Great. So which of the following city strategic priorities is your highest priority? And you can select from economic development, great neighborhoods, safe communities, transportation, planning and environment, and well-managed government. Great, so we'll pull up those poll results so everyone can see them in just a second. Okay, pretty split across the board. We appreciate your feedback. That's really helpful for us. And then I'll turn it over to Ryan so we can close out.
Thank you, everybody. With COVID, it's a little hard to have some of the engagement that we previously had. So we're trying something new with this. This is our second session. We heard some really interesting feedback, some good feedback, really intelligent questions, which we appreciate. So I wanted to thank everyone for coming and have a great night.